administration. Thanks for taking the time on a Friday morning. Hopefully it warms up a little bit more this afternoon. My name is Eric Jimenez. I'm the Chief Deputy in the State Treasurer's Office. With me is Jordan, who's are you a policy analyst?
Policy analyst, yes.
With the Governor's Office. And we are in the final stretch of our Nevada Recovers listening tour, which was an ambitious 75-day, 75-event listening tour. We're on about day 70, and we're on event 115.
Oh my God.
So
Oh my gosh.
I am very tired, but we have been traveling all across this state, meeting with regular folks for some ideas on how we can best spend $6.7 billion with a B. It's a lot of money for the state, dollars that we have from the American Rescue Plan. So we have been talking with small business owners, with our tribal communities, with nonprofit partners, and I think traditionally, when money comes in from the federal government, the state of Nevada oftentimes is not ready to utilize that money. We're underprepared to do that because we have a low tax base, we're just not equipped, we have a small state government, and now we have the opportunity to really think about what are some of the challenges that have been facing people in Carson City for a long time that we've always wanted to fix, but have never had the resources to do so. So we figured the best way to do that with an unprecedented amount of money deserved an unprecedented response from the government. So we are here today just to listen. We'll take notes for ways that you all think we might be able to invest dollars in this community. Before I go into process, if Jordan wants to say a few words.
Thank you. And so, again, Eric did a terrific job, and I do want to just sort of highlight a couple things. The first is, this is $6.7 billion, but it's coming to the state in a variety of buckets. So something like 2.7 actually goes directly to the state for spending on state and local finances. Some money goes to dedicated categories, so there's money for education, there's money for transportation, there's money for a whole variety of things. And part of the reason we're doing this tour and the reason we're going to local municipalities and local subdivisions of government is we want to make sure that that money is spent most efficiently and spent in such a way that it's used for the most specific funding bucket possible. So if there's money for transportation, we don't want Carson City spending its Carson City money on transportation projects until that general transportation bucket is totally expended. So we really want to make sure that people are making suggestions and thinking about things that are going to be most specific to their needs. And then they're also thinking about investments that are going to be real big paradigm shifts in how things are done. Because again, this is a large sum of money, it's a huge sum of money, but it is a one-time sum of money. So it's not the sort of thing that we want to focus on spending for, hiring new people, because at some point we're going to have to deal with their salaries in the future, and that money is not going to be in there. But if there's something that is a large capital project and it hasn't been able to be done, this is the time when we can make that investment and make a change to the trajectory of the state and the localities. The other thing I want to just briefly mention is that, excuse me, this money needs to be spent by 2026. So we do have a little bit of runway, and so we want to make sure that it's done in a real collaborative manner across all of these localities to get the best bang for our buck.
So we'll talk about some things today, but every idea for funding, we are trying to create a fair and equitable process for folks who may be at work or were at work last night and couldn't attend a meeting like this. Has to go through NevadaRecovers.com or one of the little comment cards, which I think we have here. But I would refer you to NevadaRecovers.com. While I'll take notes today, even if we talk about it today, that doesn't get it in the process, but every idea for funding has to be submitted where it says submit an idea right on the front of NevadaRecovers.com.
And for those watching online, this is going to be open until October 31st. There's also an option there for completing a survey. So that's if you have more general ideas about how things should be spent that aren't specific to a particular project.
Yeah, and Jordan had mentioned when we think about this money, I think it's tempting for folks to be like, well, we need to pay teachers more, or we need to invest in Medicaid rates for our seniors and things like that. We agree. However, the worst thing we could do is create a fiscal cliff because, I think right now, coming out of a pandemic, raising taxes is really not an issue that we're too excited about right now. We're trying to help families lift them up. So when we think about these dollars, what are some things that we could do on one-time cost? For example, the treasurer and myself ran a program called the PETS program. It was the largest small business program in Nevada history, which was $10,000 one-time grants to small businesses. So those are the types of things we're thinking about. Is there a building that would help in Carson City for childcare or for job resources for people who are out of work? Is there a grant program for businesses, maybe a capital preservation program for low-income businesses or disadvantaged businesses, those sorts of things. So with that, unless there's any questions on process.
Sorry, I did just have one other thing. So when you do go here to submit an idea, something we want to ask you to do is to submit individual ideas. So if you think a dog park is a great idea and an ice skating rink is a great idea, make sure you submit those as two separate ideas so people don't think that you're recommending a dog ice skating rink. Because as cool as I think that'd be, not what you were trying to convey.
Yeah, and
Your doggy's gonna be disappointed.
Nah, maybe that's the idea.
I keep submitting ideas for dog parks, but no one, I think he's on there right now with it. But I think I'll leave you with this and then we can have a conversation. We have never gotten this amount of money before. It's 150% of the state's annual budget. So I think we are really trying to be deliberate and intentional on how we spend those dollars. And the first step of that is listening directly from the community to make sure that when we do make decisions to spend dollars, it's actually gonna help people in the ways that you need it here in Carson City. So if anyone wants to start off, I will call on someone. This is a small group, so we'll call on everyone. But how can we help build the state that you deserve to live in? Yeah?
Me. I'm a retired businessman. I'm involved with a lot of nonprofits in Carson City. I'm also on the Airport Authority Board for the Carson City Airport. The Carson City Airport Terminal building is antiquated. It's a 1940s era building. It's not used for any significant purpose on the airport for the capital of the state of Nevada. Nobody goes there because it's so antiquated. And so we want to build a new terminal building out there. And what that can do is it can launch us into having that airport be a much better used airport. Especially during when the legislature is in session. There's a new big time manufacturer out there that's recycling lithium batteries. There's an immense amount of energy about wanting to grow the airport. It's going to grow on the airfield, but the FAA doesn't fund renovations for terminal buildings. And so we would like to renovate the terminal building. So that's my first idea.
So I would highly suggest you put that in the portal at nevadarecovers.com. We've been in other communities, and for, I don't think Carson City's rural, but for all designations, it does qualify as a rural area. There used to be a fund. It was the Rural Airport Infrastructure Fund, which I think was funded with $5 million from the state. It was quickly depleted. We have heard from other communities a desire to replenish that fund or create some sort of revolving sustainability in that fund. So I think, think about that when you're submitting your idea, but other communities are asking for the same thing. And I think it's really important when we do think about how do we get back from this pandemic, how do we ensure that we have cargo transport to better, assist the supply chain, how can we get passengers? And if you can find a way to make that Vegas to Reno flight or Vegas to Carson flight just a little bit cheaper, I think all of your state government would be super supportive.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure all the state government, the state legislators would be happy to fly out of Carson if we made it available. And we've had proposals from, tiny airlines that want to do commuter service, but they don't want to fly in and out of that POS. They don't. I mean, who's going to? Well, don't get me started. All right, so
Number two.
Number two. There's an arts center, the Arts Center for Carson City, the Brewery Arts Center. It sits on a 2-block campus. It has 2 historical buildings on it. The Brewery Arts Center for years has wanted to make a true arts campus on site. They need to spend a couple $1 million to transform some parking lots into a beautiful outdoor stage, sculpture garden, grounds, so that it looks like a real art, performing arts center, and transforms from being a afterthought to a center for activity in the town. That's idea number 2.
Okay.
Yep. Number 3. There's an amazing nonprofit in Carson City that nobody knows about called the Spirit of Hope. They are just using a very transferable and sustainable model. They house 50 homeless people who would otherwise be homeless. They have actually figured out how to accomplish housing of homeless people, creating affordable housing for homeless people. They are operating in a wickedly cash poor environment. Their cash. You can't even talk about cash. But the way that they operate is that they rent houses in town, and then they lease rooms in those houses to otherwise people who would be homeless at rates that they can afford. And so they have multiple houses scattered around town that they're renting and then releasing. But because they're dealing with the population they're dealing with, they can't cover their costs, right? So they have to fundraise into that. And they do. But if they had 4 houses for sure that they owned outright, had no nut to pay, on that one, and were able to lease them to their clients, they'd be self-sufficient forever, permanently. And so it would be unbelievable to accomplish giving them the money to buy 4 houses.
Do you know roughly how many people they're serving now, or what?
Yes, they have 50 people housed that would otherwise be. So, and that's like approximately a third of Carson City's homeless population.
And the majority are women.
Okay.
Yeah. So they are, and so they at one-time infusion of cash would allow them to actually house everybody in Carson City who wants, because they'd be able to have the staff necessary to go and continue to rent houses. They just need to be able to cover the general overhead costs by getting the revenue on houses they don't have to pay a rent on. So that's idea 3.
No, and I think there was a really good point brought up. We are keenly aware of the lack of some services, housing services for women, domestic violence survivors, those sorts of things. So we've heard it all over the state that we need to think about not just building more housing for folks, but also making sure that the facilities that are operational are taking into those accounts, whether it's our LGBTQ youth or domestic violence victims and those sorts of things. Sometimes people either don't feel comfortable in a general population setting, and we need to think about more targeted housing environments for them.
Yeah, that's not what Spirit of Hope is about.
Well, I've thought for a long time it would be nice to have an area where we built tiny houses that would house the homeless. It would have a park-like atmosphere, bus service, and a doctor on call, a nurse on call, and this would get people self-sufficient. They would pay what they could afford, and with the goal of getting them beyond the house into the regular community working. And it would be for people that are wanting to bring their life up. It's not a place for someone who's never going to do anything more with their life. It'd be for the people who were trying to get beyond where they were. And that was my thoughts about.
And Spirit of Hope does a distributed model of exactly what you just described. But here's idea number 4. The Northern Nevada Children's Home is a vacant piece of state land that the state has never done anything with. They have a plan for it. They want to, but if you wanted to do a non-distributed model of providing housing, putting tiny homes, you already got the land sitting there. All you got to do is pay to tear down the antiquated houses on the land and build whatever you want on there. So there's a huge opportunity there, and that would accomplish what you're describing.
Hey, John, do you know how many acres that is? It seems substantial.
Oh, I don't know how many acres it is, but it's at least 10. Yeah.
Do you know where it's at?
Yes, it's on 5th Street between Root and Stewart. Stewart and Route. It's on the south side of Fifth Street between Stewart and Route. It's, right now, I mean, there's a big, it's a giant area, and on the southwest corner of it is a state office building. On the west side of it is the Carson City Fire Department, and then all of the rest of the land is vacant.
That's a wonderful spot, it's like in the community, it's right over there.
Yeah, they already
And
got
that way
bus
they-
service.
the
yeah.
people can get around town to go where they need to go, and that would be perfect.
Yeah, the grounds are
Absolutely.
well maintained, and it's grass. It's beautiful, but the buildings are brick and boarded up, and it just sits there unused.
And something I like about all four of these ideas is that they are investments. It's not about cost, it's about doing something that really is going to change how something is handled. And so that's just something to remember, is that this is money to invest in something, not to necessarily just spend on a bandage.
So I got one more for you.
Okay. When we get to
Sorry,
50,
sorry.
when we get to 50,
Are
I'm
we
gonna
open?
stop you.
Yeah, well,
I'm glad you're here.
yeah. There's another nonprofit in town that nobody knows about. They call the Capital City Circles Initiative. And the Capital City Circles Initiative does spectacular work, not very broad, but very deep work. They facilitate people permanently moving themselves from poverty to self-sufficiency using a model that works. They've been around since '09, doing this in the community. Awesome. So they currently lease office space from the city over in the Northgate Industrial the Northgate is called the Northgate Building. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, right? City wants to dump that property. They don't want to own it anymore, and so it would be. And they share that office with another spectacular nonprofit in Carson City, which is the Ron Wood Family Resource Center. And so, I mean, if this money could be used for either Circles or Ron Wood to buy that building outright, then they could stay there permanently, and then the state would take them. I mean, the city would take the money they got from selling the building and accomplish some of their objectives. So it would be a twofer on that one. You'd get, you'd give the state some money to do what they want to do by divesting themselves of that piece of real estate, and you'd ensure the go forward prosperity of two really, really important nonprofits in Carson City.
Yeah, and I would encourage any nonprofit that you all work with in Carson City, we want to see them in this portal, mainly because the key piece of this is we have contact information for everybody that submits. I expect the state will do something for nonprofits. I don't know what that looks like just yet, like a broad kind of nonprofit thing. And the best way for us to make sure that the nonprofits in Carson have access to those dollars whenever they become available is to make sure that they're in the portal. So if you're dealing with nonprofits in the community right now, drive them to this website, and I think that's super important. Another thing you brought up, and I think we've talked with Mayor Bagwell and the Board of Supervisors about this, is how can we work collaboratively in understanding what the needs of Carson City are. Does the city have land that it's willing to part with, or give away, or build out some infrastructure, and maybe the state could come in and support some of those things like housing or nonprofit service provisions and those sorts of things. So this is going to be a long process. It's probably going to be a little longer than you all would like it to be, but one of the key elements of this is making sure that we're working directly with our local governments and the Board of Supervisors to make sure that we can make these dollars go further.
I think you'll find that the supervisors are aware of the two nonprofits that I mentioned because, well, Carson City to me is an interesting community because much of the health and human services work that gets done in Carson City is done by nonprofits. The Carson City's health and human services department does great work, but I would say that the heavy lifting is all done by nonprofits.
And we see that everywhere, whether it's Reno or Southern Nevada. They're the boots on the ground, right? And those are real jobs in the community for people working at those nonprofits. And a lot of those folks over the last 18 months, they're tired, they're burned out, right? Like they were delivering more food than they ever thought they'd have to. They were helping people with rental assistance. The Nevada Rural Housing Authority has been doing an incredible job over there with Bill Brewer. But I think, we really need to think about which nonprofits have the ability to expand, what types of programs do they want to see implemented, and we need to know about those, right? Because we can make a decision over there in that building, but that may not be what actually helps the nonprofits in the community.
All right, so I'm shutting up now.
Okay, that was only 5.
You got 45 left.
That's great.
What else?
That's it, one.
Yes.
So, to accent on John's conversation, we have nonprofits come here looking for space as well. RSVP, a very important program for the senior citizens, they're looking for a location. Exquisite, the organization that deals with human trafficking, and they're coming up short on locations where they can grow their services. And so, definitely in Carson City, it's the nonprofits that really step up for human services. And you also mentioned businesses. And what happened after COVID was we saw this new movement of people wanting to start their own businesses, or people that were working from home and deciding, I could branch out. And the funds were rolled out for the COVID relief funds, but there were a lot of people that we heard from that received nothing. And that just the most recent, the RUBA grant, they had, I believe it was $500,000, and they had $7 million in requests from small businesses. So I know we mentored probably 12 new startups or people, and people are currently in business, and maybe 2 of those received the $25,000 grant. So they were there, they're viable, they were willing to go through the process of learning how to start a business, or go through courses where they can sign off and know that your money's well spent, but they just didn't make the grade. And so more funding for those type of businesses and startups, where they can be verified to have legitimate business plans, rather than put it into a contest form. That's where we came up short. It turned into a contest.
Yeah, and I think we saw that with the demand for the PETS program, the Pandemic Emergency Technical Support Grant, which had, I think, 3 or 4 businesses right on this street, right here in Carson City, that we helped award over $102 million for. When we were in the depths of the pandemic, I think the focus was on, we need to get cash to businesses to keep these doors open, right? Because sometimes that grant was the difference between a business staying open, or keeping an employee, or letting that employee going, or closing. I think we're now approaching a different phase of the pandemic, where we have small businesses that either started up or people have kind of changed focus, but they want to expand, and it's really hard to get access to capital right now. So some ideas that we've heard from all over the state is some sort of, and I don't know what this looked like, and this is why I would encourage you all, from your expertise from the business space, some sort of zero interest loan program for people who can prove that they're a legitimate business, have a business license, have a local business license, but want to expand or want to do something else, and how can we support them, or have other nonprofits or financial institutions in the space support them at a rate that's a lot lower than going into the private market, because a lot of people just can't access that capital that some of the larger businesses can. Yeah.
I'm a volunteer over at the senior center. I would like to see all the senior centers around the country, around the state, that would get a grant, a one-time grant, that they could use that money to improve their building, buy maybe some new vehicles to deliver the lunches that they deliver for the lunch program, and just do, upgrade their building in some fashion. And some of them probably don't need that much, but they could find some way to use that money, and I think that would be beneficial. Because a lot of the people that show up for lunch there, that's the only hot meal they get a day. And so to make sure that we have a nice place for them to be, and anything that's needed to make it better would be good.
Yeah,
So just a one-time grant, so it's not something ongoing.
And we've heard this out in Dayton. We did an event with the senior center over there. I think with the pandemic, a lot of people were forced to stay at home, in particular our seniors and retirees. Some of the only interaction they're getting, not only with that one hot meal, but just some social interaction, and really,
Exactly.
and a place to go. And one of the biggest barriers we've seen, especially in communities like this, is transportation. So I would advise you to think about things like vehicles and things like that, which could live on after the pandemic,
Right,
but
exactly.
could really, I think, improve the quality of life for a lot of seniors in the area.
Well, there's a lot of programs all day long that happen there. People can come and do any number of activity, which is great. And And so, and then people come in and take lunches to go. So because a lot of them don't wanna come into the building, and so we have between 50 and 100 meals a day that go out the door that way, which is good. But, yeah, I just, we gotta take care of our seniors. I'm a senior now, but, anyway.
Gotta take care of them.
Okay.
That's a good.
What else? And if you don't have to think about anything here today, if you forget something when you walk out, you can always go to the website and submit something too. Yes. Number 6.
Number 6, well, because this is not Carson City specific though. This is the big idea, right?
Okay.
Nevada is home to what seems to me to be the best access to green energy of any place on Earth. I mean, we have ample geothermal, we have sunshine, we have wind, we have everything that relates to green energy. But what we don't have is the infrastructure to generate that electricity from it and deliver it to places. So, I mean, and a real big idea is the state, in a public-private partnership, could build a huge amount of green energy capacity somewhere in the state, and then build out the infrastructure of the high tension lines to bring the electricity to more populated areas, and then they could attract business to the state. Say, hey, you bring your business that employs 1,000 people at $30 an hour average to our state, and we'll give you free energy for 5 years. That the state generates.
And that,
we could become the green energy manufacturing hub for the world, with that idea.
And that is definitely something that we're working on, and we were talking earlier in this last session, we started the Infrastructure Bank, which is going to be funded with $50 million to invest in those sorts of projects. We also signed SB 448, which directed NV Energy to build that high voltage, high tension line. It's the Green Lake West and Green Lake North projects, and so that's going to go across the north of the state to connect out towards Ely and then down. Because currently we have no good connection between Reno, Carson to Vegas, which is incredible to me when you think about these are our 2 huge population centers, and if there's a cut in California, we no longer have a way to move energy between the two.
And it's mostly BLM land, so it's not like you're going to have to worry about property rates out there.
No, and those 2 projects are going to create thousands and thousands of jobs. And I think that the key pieces, and I think this is the big idea, right? Not only just producing the energy here at home for the residents, but also distributing it to other states who are in need of that energy for their renewable energy standards. I mean, we could generate a lot of revenue from renewable energy simply because right now the transmission lines don't exist. But those 2 projects are really going to take us to the next level of bringing it up to Idaho, Oregon, those sorts of places. So I think it's a great idea.
Just think how many data centers would come here if we said free power for 5 years.
Right.
And then once they're here, you got them.
Yeah.
They don't move easily.
That's so much. It's a terrific idea.
Cool. Yes?
So there was a bill at legislature regarding inland ports for rail. I'm not sure how far that got.
So that did not move. I believe that they are still looking at, because that was specifically for the one out in Fallon. They're still looking at other ones. Because we could have an inland port. The issue was current statute doesn't let them put an inland port close to residential properties, and so that's what they did in Fallon. But I do know that they're working on one down in southern Nevada. And that also is something that the Infrastructure Bank, because again, we've got a bunch of money coming in a bunch of different places. There's also going to potentially be federal money coming in for infrastructure. And so one of the difficulties, but also the opportunities, is that we have to make sure that the money goes into the bucket that's most narrowly tailored for it. Because if we spend this money on infrastructure, then when the infrastructure money comes, we might not be able to spend it as efficiently. So.
No, but I think I spent a lot of time in the Infrastructure Bank, which has got $75 million in state bonding. And we actually commissioned a new study on supply chain and inland ports with some coronavirus relief fund dollars that we had. I think there is a tremendous opportunity to look at a variety of different infrastructure improvements that don't rely on traditional supply chain mechanisms. So right now in the Port of Oakland, you know that containers are being just held up in the shipyard and that they're not getting on trains and moving over to the rest of the country. If you could get them over to inland areas and get them onto trains faster, it saves a lot of money for regular folks and consumers and businesses trying to get there. So I think that's part of our broad infrastructure plan. I think there are some federal dollars for things like that in the upcoming bipartisan infrastructure package, which we are knocking on wood, passes any day now. And I think that's what's important about this process. We are not just talking about the American Rescue Plan dollars. While we appreciate those dollars, this process also helps us get a needs assessment for that infrastructure bill. So when it shows up, we know what are some ideas where we could deploy that capital very, very quickly. So.
And in my past, I worked in economic development, and my project was the Northeastern Nevada Regional Railport. And that was done with county money and selling the land. And that was, that had to be locked in back in 2009, we finalized it in 2009. But then we saw the uptick in the fact that it could be an inland port, and we were working with the Port of Oakland to identify that location as an inland port, and we were going to work together in the past. So they saw it as a value to Nevada, and they would like to have seen it happen because they wanted to store those containers there or move them at least into Nevada.
Does an inland port involve air traffic, or is it only rail traffic?
Typically it's rail.
Okay.
They're moving it, and then now with some of the technological advancements, I'm just going to nerd out for a second, but some of the blockchain technologies allow you to get containers off of trains faster on the supply chain side, and the difference between a couple minutes or a couple hours for moving a container off a train, I mean, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual revenue for a business, which may make them get different decisions or move products and goods faster. So I think it's one of the things we need to keep looking at, but I think for these communities right here in kind of as we move east of Nevada, I think it's a really interesting way to connect goods to the I-80 freeway, and when we do have long jams in our ports, I think it's a really interesting idea to really create some economic opportunity.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, everyone, for showing up early on a Friday and providing such terrific ideas. Please let everyone know in your networks, your people you work with, everything. Nevada.recovers.com. Have them fill out the survey or have them submit ideas. For anyone online, you can do that until October 31st. So again, Nevada.recovers.com. Thank you.
And if you have any questions, we work right over there. I believe the building's opening up full-time pretty soon, so make sure you take your Carson City Capitol tour. I hear Jordan's one of the best tour guides. All the information is wrong, but you'll have a good time.
Great stories, none of them true.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.